Here's the chart we'll be using for today's swatch. Cute little love heart that will give you a good idea of how to work the stitches for the pattern, and a great thing to practice on. You can see the chart is actually more elongated than the final result, and that's because the charting software I use has squares rather than actual stitch-shaped stitches representing there. You can get graph paper that has an elongated stitch compared to the row height, which gives a more accurate depiction of what your knitting will look like in the end. So it's important to show you that. With the chart, wrong side and right side rows are represented, and you always read the right side row starting from the right and in the direction of your knitting. Read this way. So the first row is knit. The second row, which is the wrong side row, will be worked back across this way. The little dot in the middle means on the wrong side, this is also knit. So we're getting our garter stitch by working these rows. The chart starts from here. We'll do a couple of garter ridges before starting the actual Intarsia section. And they're the only stitches to worry about in this particular chart. The white represents colour 3 and the black represents colour 1. The Intarsia section will be purled. So on the wrong side rows, you will purl those stitches to create a stockingette heart. Outside of those, you'll notice that there's a couple of spots where on the wrong side row, it's purled instead of knit in colour 1. And that's just to keep the pattern flowing with the stockingette. It'll make sense when you're doing it, but when that stitch is knit instead of purled, it creates a little lump or a ridge there that affects how the pattern looks overall. I generally like to go analog with my chart reading. You can use various devices to read your charts, and some people prefer it that way. I like to use this magnetic board and magnet strip, and each time I complete a row I just shift it up so that I can see the row I'm about to knit and how that interacts with what I have already knit, which helps me to read my knitting. So that's how I work the chart. One other thing that you need to do before you can start knitting is prepare your yarn. With Intarsia, the project is worked back and forth until you get to the point where you're working the motif. And then you will actually be working separate colours for each section. So on this row here, I will knit to the point of colour change with this colour. Then change colour to the white, so I'll bring in some more yarn for that. Then when I come to the other side and knit across, I will actually use another little ball of colour for that section. So you'll need 5 balls altogether to complete this row here. That's where the most colour changes happen. You'll have a little ball for this part, colour 3 here, colour 1 here, colour 3 here, and colour 1 there. It's a little bit of a juggle, but it is worth it, and it's an amazing result. I just take it slow. Sometimes you just have to rip it out and start again. You could probably put a lifeline in if you wanted to make it easier to rip out. I have found because they're essentially short rows, it can be a little bit tricky to frog back. So you really need to do it a stitch at a time, or I've actually got pretty good at frogging Intarsia because I did it a lot when I was creating the pattern and knitting up lots of swatches to try out which will be the most effective stitch pattern for the project. So maybe you won't need to rip it out, and that would be great. But it's a practice and it's something to learn on, so don't be too worried about getting it perfect. Another thing to think about too is that the stitches before it's blocked can still be a little wonky, and that's okay. Once you block it, the stitches will naturally even out to some extent anyway, and you can just sort of tweak it a little bit when you're blocking. Like for example, here, these stitches are looking slightly tight. I can kind of pull them back in. I'm using a little tapestry needle. And some of these looser ones I might tighten up a bit when I'm blocking, just to create a more even effect overall. The back of your project will look something like this. Lots of ends to weave in for all those different little yarn balls that you used. The most up here where the more colour changes happened. These little stitches show where the yarn has been twisted when colours are changed, and that holds it in place and means that there's no little holes where you're changing colours. So they're anchored by twisting the yarn, which I'll show you after I've shown you how to make your little mini balls. So essentially it's knitting and purling. They're the stitches. There's nothing complicated about those. It's about being a little bit organised when you're changing colours, and that's it, really. So one question will be, how much yarn for each of these little balls? And that's a good question. I tend to just make them and not worry too much about the length, but there is a way that you can calculate the length of the yarn, and I'll show you that first. So if you look at a section where you need to have a single colour, for example this part here, I'll be using one little ball of yarn and then another ball of colour 3 for this section here. So to work out the yarn I need for this section, I count the stitches, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 2 of those makes 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 31, 36, 39 stitches. So to calculate how much yarn I would need for 39 stitches, I start by giving myself a tail to weave in and work with, and then wrap 10 stitches around, 10 times around a needle, the needle that I'll be using for the project. So there's 10 stitches there. Slide those off, hold my yarn tail, and I have a length here that's equivalent to 10 stitches. So to make enough for 40 of those, I'll measure it against itself 3 times, creating 4 strands, plus my little tail for weaving in. Add a weaving in tail for the other end, and just add some more because you don't want to run out of yarn. And snip there. So that should be enough yarn, this tiny little piece here, for that section. There's a few ways of managing yarn with Intarsia. Working from a centre pull ball is most effective because it's a neater way of knitting and managing your yarn. Then leave the outside free for winding off a bit of yarn if you need to add more yarn during the project. And there's a way you can make this small little amount of yarn into a centre pull yarn ball. It's called a butterfly, and these are pretty common in Intarsia knitting. And you make one by taking an end with a little bit over and holding it with your thumb, and with 2 fingers wrap in a figure 8 pattern, around and around. And once you get close to the end, slide them off. Wrap the end that you're working with around several times and tuck that under, just to hold that yarn end in place. They're kind of a little bit tight as mine. There we go. And then this end, which was the end my thumb was holding initially, is inside, and this effectively becomes a centre pull ball with just a amount of yarn that you need for that section. Here's some I made earlier in varying sizes. So I made a bigger one for the main part. I could be working from my main ball of yarn of colour 1 for this section, and then a couple of smaller ones for where I need to have a second ball here and a third ball here. So I have my 5 yarn balls ready to go. It's time to get started. And starting the swatch. I'm just going to work the chart part of this Intarsia swatch. So I've knit the first 4 rows of the chart, and the first 12 stitches, where the 13th stitch will now be the new colour, start colour change. The first one's a bit tricky because I need to anchor the yarn with my finger, and it will be a few rows before that kind of firms up into the project, but it's fine. Just make sure there's a good length of tail there to hold on to and to weave in later. And the first step is that I have my yarn I just knit, the working yarn. That's now the old yarn. I'm going to anchor the yarn between my left hand fingers and the work, holding it here. Then the step every time for changing colour with Intarsia is to carry the old colour over the colour that's about to be knit. And that causes a little trap where the old colour gets trapped by the new colour as it's knit. It's a bit fiddly for 1 stitch, but we will knit 1 stitch. And I won't bring in another little yarn just yet. I'll wait till the next row. So I'll continue this colour. Again, I use the colour I just knit and place it over the colour I'm about to knit, which will trap those, twist those together, trap them, however you like to call it, and continue that row in colour 1, knitting to the end. Turn my work and for the next row I'll lift this little slider up to reveal the next row, which will have 3 stitches in colour 3, starting from the one before the last one knit. I will knit back across to that point. If you can hear a lot of chirping in the background, we have a lot of birds around here, native birds. They're so loud. Maybe you can hear them. Okay, so I get to this point. Now I'm going to purl across these. The heart is worked in stocking net, which means I will bring firstly the working yarn to the front of the work, Then I'm going to make sure that the next yarn's positioned in front. Bring the yarn just used over the colour I'm about to knit and pick up the colour I'm about to knit and see how that's trapped. That's been caught by the new colour. That's exactly what we want. I will purl across the 3 stitches shown on the chart, 1, 2, 3. So this is the old colour, I won't be using that anymore. I bring that over the colour I'm about to work, which will be a new colour. I'm going to leave this be working up this side now and bring in the next little butterfly bobbin. So again, and here I might tug that stitch from earlier, that first C3 stitch. Bring the new colour under and anchor it with my finger while I work that stitch. And I'm going back to garter stitch for the rest of this row. So I'll bring the yarn back over to the back of the work so I can work garter stitch. Work a couple of stitches and then pause to show you that that's being trapped by colour 1. It's all quite tidy. And will be much tidier once I weave in those ends. So I'm going to knit to the end of row 6, turn my work and start row 7. Row 7, all knit across this row as with all the right side rows. And here I will be working another new C2 stitch on either side. So I knit to where I want to change colour. Which is here. So organise my work, keep organised. That tail's a little bit annoying. And I carry the yarn just worked over the yarn I'm about to work, trapping it underneath. Bring the new yarn up and knit across those 5 stitches. And repeat that process. So this is the yarn I'm about to work, the old yarn over the top, trapping that by the new colour and knit to the end of the row. Turn the work and go back across. So pause, slide the slider up and see what the next row will be. It'll be an additional stitch on either side again. So stop here, I bring that working yarn to the front since we will be purling. And then I bring it over the yarn I'm about to work with, locking that in, and purl across those 7 stitches. It's good just to pause and gently tug. You don't want to over tighten the stitches, but just keep the knitting firm, not tight. Now I'm ready to change colour again. So I bring the yarn just worked over to the left, bring up the colour I'm about to use, and again I'm going to garter, work knit stitch back across that section. So I'll bring the yarn to the back of the work and knit, and you can see this has been locked into place by that yarn. So we're starting to see this section form, those little loops of yarn being trapped. Turn the work. I'm going to knit ahead a little bit until this point where we're not increasing. Perhaps I'll do it here. So I'll knit ahead to a few rows. I've worked a few more rows and am now up to row 13, and just wanted to pause to show you how where the colour change happens stacked. Just want to make it clear that it's worked the same, nothing changes. So you basically capture the yarn behind the work in the same way. Starting with colour 1, work my 5 stitches across. Then bring that yarn over the top to the left, knit across to the next colour change. Stop there, change, bring my working yarn, old yarn, over the new yarn about to be knit and trap it in place, and knit to the end. And turn the work. When I turn the work, also just take a moment to place those little balls in their working order so it's easy when you're coming across them. It can get chaotic, you can get caught up and tangled up pretty easily in Intarsia, and that's fine. Sometimes I just go for it and get tangled and just untangle along the way. But if you just take a minute to keep the yarn ordered, it does make it a lot easier. If I'm working on a project that will take me some time, I like to put the work on a tray so it's all set out and I can just put it aside and pick it up again. Right now I'm working on the kitchen table, so I need to pack it away when it's dinner time. Okay, so I forgot to shift that up and I missed my next colour change, so I'll just go back and tink back one step and work this next one. Bring the yarn forward, over the yarn about to be worked, the yarn about to be worked, and purl across. I'm now up to row 22 and just wanted to show you that purl stitch that happens when we change colours on the wrong side rows only. The right side rows are always knit. I've now got 5 bobbins going at once for this, so I've added in another 2. Knit up to that 3 stitches, and then the 4th stitch is a purl stitch. It doesn't have the dot. So bring the yarn forward to the front of the work and purl. And this is just to create a more even result here. Otherwise there would be a little garter bump there and it wouldn't look so neat. So it just neatens that effect. Then I bring that yarn just worked over the new yarn and purl across to the next colour change, which will be with colour 1 and will also be a purl stitch. So this stitch is the one that will be changed. Here's my new centre bobbin. Getting a little tangled here. Where are we? So I bring the yarn just worked over the yarn I'm about to work. Short tail there, pull that tight. Purl the first stitch. Then I'm going to knit the next stitch, which was worked in the previous row. So I knit that. And then purl the next stitch. And carry on. So there's several places where the stitches are purled on the wrong side row with colour 1. Practice this, work out how your gauge is looking and how it's working with your intarsia. If it's a bit loose and holy, you might find that you need to go down a needle size.